Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another live Q&A session with Coach Alina. Welcome back.
Hi, Daniel. Hi, everyone.
It's funny. I literally lost track of time. I sent you the link, but you made it in time, so you were,
Yeah,
that's
I
nice.
was on my laptop, but I was like, I saw the notification and I just immediately like jumped on the link. So yeah,
So nice. So yeah, how are things on your end?
great. Nothing to complain about. And
Love it.
you?
No, things are really good. Things are really great, and I'm got a lot of support yesterday from that. I don't know if you saw that video where we talked about like Sanya. Do you remember Sanya
Oh
from
yeah,
the
yeah,
immunity
yeah. That
program?
was great. I remember Sanya, but also I saw the video which you posted, and also then I clicked on the Sanya's like presentation. It was amazing, and
Right.
as I was watching like your video, and at some point I got really angry with the whole this situation. Like, how is it possible that such a great, ideas gets like really kind of like blocked because of some like protocols or whatever it is like that the community is not ready to hear certain messages, and therefore I don't know, it felt kind of wrong. I don't know, but yeah.
Same here. And by the way, I got an email back from Sanya, and she had kind of similar feelings, but she said that she wrote something like the Hungarian doctor who said that doctors should wash their hands between going from like an autopsy to like delivering babies.
Yeah.
He was kind of ridiculed by the establishment and people made fun of him. But now this is apparently known as the Semmelweis reflex. The Semmelweis reflex is when kind of establishment just kind of laughs at a new idea. But we see where that leads. So she was kind of
Yeah.
like she was kind of almost encouraged by this reaction. So I found that nice to hear.
Yeah, I know. And I was just like recently, I posted like one of the videos was where I was thinking about like how simply by changing the classification of the whole problem could instantly bring so much relief and give the, let's say, like different professionals idea how to work with that. If you just like, instead of like insomnia being something this like disease on its own or whatever it like the classification says, into phobia, just make it in the same category, and then people will just know what to do like with that. And I'm sure that people, those people who are working with like mental health in that kind of like area, they would have at least some idea like where to go. And yeah, it is like what a small shift is needed for like the big kind of like unfolding of
Yeah.
the message and everything. Yeah.
I 100% agree, and it's fascinating because I think in like one of the first emails you ever sent to me, like when you were still sort of on the recovery path, you had that like realization that I think insomnia has like a phobic nature, and I thought that was great, but it took me a long time to kind of fully grasp where that leads, which is exactly what you said, just classifying insomnia as a phobia. People in the established psychotherapy space could be like, aha, that little ass. So we
Yeah.
should totally work towards that. 100%.
Yeah, but I can totally understand how some people would say, well, there are many other things that can disrupt sleep. And then also like, okay, insomnia, they classify acute insomnia, chronic insomnia, but they make it somehow based on the length of the struggle rather than the nature of it.
Yep.
Because like when someone loses sleep because, let's say, I don't know, like some pain or something, like normal sleep disruption, that when it happens, like, is it like, can we call it insomnia, or we can call it a sleep disruption? Because let's say, take an analogy, when someone gets fever and just common cold, and like they have like running nose, is it a thing on its own, or is it just like a symptom? Is it something that just will pass with time, as long as, let's say, virus is no longer there? Or do we have to now like make it a separate thing on its own? And the same way, like, maybe to approach also sleep disruption as something like a consequence, is like a secondary. But when
Exactly.
like the reason why that sleep was lost, and I think like why many people get into the classification of chronic insomnia, is because of that phobic nature that hasn't been investigated fully and or understood. So that's why
Yeah.
it becomes chronic, not because there is certain thing that keeps them awake for 20 years or something.
Totally. And I know, see, we have questions and we're going to get to them in a second,
Yep.
but I just want to share like one more thing, which was that I was pondering this, I think today or yesterday, and I thought maybe something we could do is like just take the DSM-4, like, the classification of like psychiatric disorders or whatever. If you imagine reading the current classification of insomnia and the kind of phobia to somebody who has had insomnia or insomnia, and just say, which one do you identify more with, and do some kind of poll or something like that. Could be like a first step towards.
Yeah,
Who knows?
that could be a good idea.
All right, let's check in with the questions. Rahul is here and says hi. Hi, Rahul.
Hi, Raul.
And he's saying, I'm sleeping 5-6 hours for 5 days. Last night couldn't fall asleep at all. Is this a speed bump? What do you think, Alina?
That's a good question, actually, because like the question, like whether it's something like a natural sleep disruption that can happen to literally anyone, or it's something something that belongs to this insomnia world. And I would say the moment when we begin to think about it, is it bad for me? Is it not safe for me to, so this kind of like fearful thoughts is something that can make it a speed bump. So I would say like any this kind of emotional attachment to that is what defines usually speed bump. But when there is no emotional attachment, when there is just like occasional sleep or occasional night when sleep is not like does not look perfect, or it's delayed or interrupted and so on and so on, so it could be like normal sleep disruption. So I would say our reaction to even casual sleeplessness is what something that can define a speed bump, but in itself delayed sleep onset is not really a speed bump. I don't know, like, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. And it's like my immediate reaction just hearing this is like, yeah, it's probably a speed bump. But it actually it's almost like it can't be determined by the way it's worded here, because if somebody sleeping, getting easier sleep, and last night couldn't fall asleep, but then nothing else, then it's just they were awake. That's not a speed bump. But if that person, like, it took a long time for them to fall asleep, and then like something is wrong, what's happening,
Yeah.
now we're in speed bump territory, right?
Yep, absolutely, yes.
But and by the way, Rahul, the way you asked this question, it was kind of very straightforward, like not much emotion in it. That makes me encouraged. It's very little pondering around it. Cool. Let's move on to Libby here, who says the following: my husband works a very stressful job and often says he needs to trust I have everything under control at home so he can focus on work. I know he means well, but this ends up making me feel a lot more pressure to sleep. I feel like if I could trust that he was willing and able to pick up the slack on my tough days, it would be a lot easier to let go of lingering fear. And I think it ended there. So it was sort of a comment on what's going on. And yes, some thoughts pop up in my brain when I hear this. But yeah, what do you think when you hear this, Alina?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's a tricky one, because I know that there are other people involved, so it's not always that kind of like that we can definitely say, oh, that's what is happening, and this is how best to react. I would say, like, I will speak from my personal experience, because I was also, I also have a husband who was kind of like secondary affected by my, like my struggle. So his sleep got disrupted a lot because I was waking up constantly, or I would have like some meltdown or something like this. So yeah, I would say that communication probably was the best I could do, like proper honest communication about how I feel, and maybe like invitation to the partner to understand better also the problem here as well, because oftentimes, like our close ones, they are not always know how to help us. They want probably to help us, but because there's so little known about this topic, sometimes like things that they say without like any particular intention can trigger us a lot. So I would say maybe like educating, like, or learning about this issue together with partner could really be beneficial for both, because also the person who lives with us will know how to support us when we need, and at the same time we know that we don't have to feel like we are, I don't know, like not doing our best or something. So it's like more transparent communication. This is something what really helped me to kind of move on the journey, as I was like sharing my life with someone else. So yeah.
No, thanks for sharing that. And I guess, on my end, what I would like to add is, I spent a lot of time, or some time pondering, like, what is kind of like like when we have some type of arguments with our, our loved ones, our spouses, etc. Like, what does it kind of boil down to? What's the anatomy of it, like arguments, etc.? And to me, it kind of boils down to this idea that they shouldn't react that way. Like, there's something wrong with how they're reacting and thinking and behaving. And of course, when I think that, is, let's say I'm arguing with somebody and I think you shouldn't think that way, then I feel compelled to kind of change how they think, which then makes them think, them on their end, they're like, well, you think there's something wrong with how I think and behave? Well, then they're automatically on defense mode, and then they want to correct you. So I think, again, it's like about communication, and we see that the other, like, see things from the other person's perspective. And when the baseline becomes like, there's nothing wrong with how another person acts or like, a thought can never be wrong. It's just something that happens. And when we don't think the other person should or shouldn't act another way, like, things become easier. So just some general thoughts there. And I think we'll leave it there. Hope that's helpful, Libby. Some kind of drifting off into kind of like life coaching rather than sleep coaching for a second there. Okay, Brandon is here and says, hello guys. A question: is it possible that I have recovered from insomnia, even if I still sleep 4 to 6 hours and feel totally fine? I don't feel tired, but still want 6 to 8 hours more often. I'm not scared of wakefulness, and I sometimes will implement a sleep effort, but not attached to it working, more of a fun test. Wow, what an interesting and insightful question. So again, Brandon says, have I recovered from insomnia even if I don't sleep as much as I did before? Very interesting question, insightful question. What do you think when you hear this, Alina?
Yeah, I think I was in a similar phase on my journey, and it was also kind of like one of the finishing like touches of insomnia, where like the major this turmoil, emotional turmoil, is no longer there, but I still I see that sleep is kind of stays on the same level. So it's like more like hitting a plateau. It's like not great, not terrible. And it kind of also like situations like this is an invitation from the brain to keep problem solving. Okay, there is something wrong. Like you sleep 4 or 5 hours and you were sleeping before like 7, 8 hours. So something is wrong. So is it your new normal? And so on. So now we can just observe the same thing that the brain did or have been doing all this time, but now it's just kind of like attached itself on this particular situation, and therefore it kind of like invites for more problem solving, for more like looking into like how to fix this and so on and so on. So sometimes it is really helpful to be mindful of that. And at the same time, I would say that for me, for example, like it was also like the recovery as a word is very tricky, because it feels like, okay, once it's done, it's done. So whatever happens after is like, deal with it. It's like more like when once we kind of claim that we are recovered, then we kind of cut for ourselves any opportunity or chance of having like a poor night's sleep, or just normal sleeplessness that can happen, or short sleep that can happen. And that can create this mind trap, where we feel like, well, but I thought I'm recovered, but here I am finding myself in this kind of ridiculous situation when I cannot sleep more than 4 or 5 hours, and I'm still fine, but it's not great. So I would say, like, for me, the whole recovery, even definition, had to be kind of like rethought, because in a way, like, recovery, it's just like fading away of the problem when you no longer even ponder whether you're recovered or not, whether you don't even care of having a tag or identity of someone who has recovered, or someone who is a good sleeper, or someone who is a bad sleeper. Is actually removing any sort of like identity with the problem, related to the problem. And that is something that can really push someone like further. And basically what happens naturally after is, once we really stop evaluating how we are doing, whether we are recovered or not, this is when sleep kind of like returns slowly on its own pace. but it kind of like returns the way it was before insomnia, and without us even noticing it or even like celebrating it, because it's something that, yeah, okay, that's fine, like now I sleep 7-8 hours, not a big deal, just like it was not a big deal 4 or 5 hours. I'm okay with either outcome. So I would say really kind of I just see like an invitation from the brain to keep problem solving, and we just need to be careful with that. That's all I would say. Nothing wrong on the journey, like about that situation.
So well said. And I hope, of course, these these live Q&As, they're really for the community, to help the community, but they're so helpful to me too, because now I'm like picking up things and learning things. And when I had what's his name, Drew Linsalata, who has a really nice podcast on this show, one of the things that we talked about, or he said, was that when being recovered, he said, I look at it as when you're no longer wondering if you're recovered, right?
Yes,
and when he said that, I was like, oh yeah, that's a nice one. But I didn't really connect it with like this question from Brandon. But it's exactly the same question, and it's the same answer. Makes so much sense. It's like when we're no longer wondering, like, do I have insomnia or not?
Yeah.
Then there really isn't anything there anymore. So well said and well contextualized. Cool. Brandon, hope that made sense to you. Here's a different one. Steven says, what is Coach Michael doing now? And for those of you who are newer to the channel, Coach Michael and myself started like the Sleep Coach School with the idea to create like a coaching program. And then we started the Insomnia Immunity program, et cetera, et cetera. But then he left the school because I think mainly it became quite a lot of work, and he was sort of drifting into retirement. So I think last time I spoke to him, he was like semi-retired. He worked a little bit, but was kind of working on his hobbies. And I've actually I asked him individually, hey, do you want to come back on and maybe share something with the community? And then he was like, maybe a little wishy-washy, but maybe he'll be back. But as far as I know, he's either retired or semi-retired and still here in Oregon, of course. All right. Dominic says, Libby, tell your husband it makes things worse. He needs to understand that he has to let go of his own personal worry, which is like, of course, if he doesn't pressure Libby, things get easier. But then if you tell somebody, don't pressure somebody, then it's tricky. But thanks for the input there, Dominic. Tom says, I find telling myself there's nothing I can do when I have difficulty sleeping at night to help me. But wouldn't that be a sleep effort? Wow, we have so many intriguing, interesting questions today. Amazing. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I think I was in that kind of situation as well, when that kind of became already, in a way, like some sort of mantra, because it really cut down any efforts that I could possibly be doing. The moment when I realized, wait, what am I doing? There's nothing I can do. It doesn't matter what I do now. It doesn't matter what I choose. And it gave me this kind of like relief, like, oh, thank God, there's nothing I can do. And there were a couple of moments when I kind of fell for it, in terms of like the brain went like, oh, now we have to like use it and relying on that. But I would say now, as Tom is like being aware of that, it already kind of stops having control over his life, because the only way how sleep effort can be truly intervening with our journey is by not being aware of it. So I would say like the biggest thing that can actually neutralize effort is just being aware that that's an effort and that is not something that is supposed to work. So even if now it would feel like, okay, I have to now keep saying to myself, there is nothing I can do, and we feel like the desire to keep like using that word, sometimes like again bringing like awareness, wait, but there's nothing I can do. So whether I say it, there is nothing I can do, or if I don't say it, nothing will change the nature of sleep. It will still be just like it was. So I would say like really awareness here is something that can neutralize any sleep efforts. And for me, I would say that's how I would say maybe even like teaching kind of developed from first. We started with this fearless approach, like, oh, just do the opposite, just do what the brain does not want you to do, And then it came with more like gentle approach, like, oh, just like see, like, like break it down into manageable pieces, don't be too hard on yourself, and so on and so on. And at some point of the journey, sleep efforts become so slim, like there's like barely noticeable, and sometimes really not noticeable. Sometimes we don't know whether something is an effort or not. So the problem, like the trying to figure out whether something is an effort or not becomes like just another rabbit hole on its own. And at that point, simple awareness can neutralize anything. That's what I learned. And even if like the mind now kind of invites us to kind of use that phrase in order to get something from sleep, just by simply realizing, yeah, I know, but still, even if I will believe that kind of like illusion, it still doesn't change a thing about sleep. Sleep will stay exactly as it is. It's passive, and there is nothing you can do about it. So whether you think that there is nothing we can do about it or not, if that makes sense, it gets very tricky to talk about it. But I think like this is something that eventually everyone kind of encounters. And I would say this type of question shows that the person is already very well advanced and is really well aware of his own brain, how it works. It's a great sign. It's a really good sign.
Yeah, you said it all. I have nothing to add except I always want to add something because it's so fun to add things. But so, this is one little thing, which is the secret idea. Like you said, like the only real when sleep efforts create problem for is kind of when we are like we're not aware of them at all, and we just act according to them without knowing them. But so I think of them as secret. When there's when they're secret, that's when they're tricky. But once we know of a secret, then it's like the secret doesn't exist anymore. So now the question is almost like, can this become a secret? And of course it can't, because you already know about it. So again, you've already answered the question in a very nice way.
Yeah.
Cool. We have a question from Tracy who says, will Set It and Forget It help? Which, by the way, if you don't know, that's one of my books. Will Set It and Forget It help with insomnia due to menopause and hot flashes? And this is a great question, and it comes in many shapes or forms. Of course, it's a very common question, like, will this help if my insomnia is caused by this and that? And to me, the answer is if there is any component of like fear of not sleeping, it will help, because it's all about that. And we will learn that, for example, hot flashes and menopause can definitely cause a lot of sleep disruption. It can disrupt our sleep. But even if we wake up with a hot flash, and it's clearly that disrupts our sleep, it doesn't automatically create insomnia, because insomnia is this self-perpetuating struggle that has kind of a life of its own. So short answer is, yeah, it will help anyone who has had this fear of not sleeping. And yeah, I will just end there. So I think we answered the question. Let's see. Okay, Dominic is here and asking the following. A few weeks ago, I began noticing my sleep onset, and it would wake me up. The morning hours I used to sleep became even less. I started saying, don't mess this up. Don't sabotage your sleep. And it ends up just waking me up over and over. I will take a look at hypnic awareness playlist, but what you suggest is scary and frustrating because my already broken sleep became worse. Let's go back. Okay, so what happened again? I began noticing my sleep onset. Okay. And I said, don't mess this up. Don't stop. Okay, I understand what's happening. Yeah, what do you think when you hear this, Alina?
Yeah, it's a good question and a very common situation. I struggle with this myself, and for me, sleep onset was and monitoring myself as I'm falling asleep was one of the stickiest and least favorite experiences, because this is kind of like tricky, because like all you want is to sleep, and when the body is really, you can feel it's ready to fall asleep, and then you just like wake up, and it's all creates a lot of like struggles, and it seems like there is no way out of that situation. And like Dominic here, like he wrote that what was it like?
He was like, don't sabotage it, that part?
Don't mess this up, don't sabotage your sleep. But the question is, can you actually not do it? Like, can you actually not monitor yourself? And the answer here would be, you cannot not do it, because this is something that is happening automatically. You are not creating those thoughts. You're not creating that hypervigilance. So I would say the biggest or the first step here is to just realize that none of it is your fault. It's not something that you're intentionally doing or subconsciously, like there is like kind of desire to sabotage. You're not how to say, you're not doing it voluntarily. So just to maybe if there is certain like level of guilt or self-judgment that is pressuring you right now and creates a lot of like suffering, that could already help. Just know that you are not kind of in control here. So whatever is happening because the brain learned that being awake or not falling asleep is really, really bad because of whatever like education we got before. Let's say like how, you know, they were scaring us, like how not sleeping can, you know, create all sorts of problems. So we come to this problem already prepared to fight for our sleep and realize, or how to say, thinking that not sleeping can actually harm us. And therefore the brain kind of takes that as a comment, and now it tries to protect you at all costs. So that's why it now begins to become hyper vigilant. There is this hyper awareness and everything, all these kind of things that are happening completely automatic. Now, to approach it, basically the way how I approach it, or how I demystify this experience, was that I noticed that when it happens, like the biggest kind of like the sudden awakening, or this happens, is just the moment before I'm falling asleep, right? So in a way, it can be, of course, can be looked at as a sleep disruption, something that is like preventing you from something that you really want, of course, and it can be annoying, it can be frustrating. I don't really argue about that. Now, on the flip side, there is also it also happens during, like, when the body is ready to fall asleep. So there is like a natural process of sleep onset is happening. So as we are falling asleep and we are monitoring ourselves and we are noticing when the body gets relaxed and we are kind of like begin drifting off and things like that. So when it happens, the brain kind of like alerts us, oh my God, don't mess this up, this is really important to like so we can take it also as a sign, yeah, this kind of like learned fear creates this unpleasant like signal from the brain, but at the same time is also a sign that all the sleep mechanisms are working perfectly well, because the body is now trying to, you know, create like sleep, and it's still trying to do its job regardless of fear, regardless of all other kind of like scary emotions and thoughts that surround insomnia. So I would say that changing relationship with that experience can really help, because once we stop seeing it as an enemy, but seeing it as something, as just maybe even as a positive like news, like good news, that okay, sleep is coming. I know it's like the brain kind of disrupts it for now, but it's okay. I can, you know, I can be okay with it, or at least something neutral, something like, okay, here it goes, you know, so like not creating any extra reaction to that can really help, because once we no longer fear response, that response will kind of like phase away with time. And there will be a moment when the sleep just happens and the brain kind of like forgets to warn you about that, and you just like smoothly transition to sleep. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my just like general thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And you know, as you were talking, I was reminded of something that really struck me the other week, where I had a client who asked me, one in BedTyme actually, a client who said, he said something like, now I can't even yawn anymore. He was like, what he experienced was that he starts to yawn, and then he became aware of it, and then he's like, the yawn was interrupted, which I found it so fascinating, because it was such a complete parallel to this to me, that a yawning is like a passive process that just happens by itself. But when we start to paying attention to it, you can see how we can start to yawn, and then we're like, oh, now I'm yawning, what's going on? And then we're like, then it jolts us out of the yawn. Very, very, very similar. It was just so fascinating to me. But to just add something that could be helpful and tag along to what you said. And by the way, Stephen asked about Coach Michael, and you know, although he's not so active in the school anymore, this is one of his analogies that will live on forever, I hope, which is the airplane analogy, which he came up with, where, you know, we have an airplane that's about to land, and normally when an airplane lands, there's some transition from flying to like being on the ground, which is similar to like there's transition from us being awake to being asleep. There's normal turbulence, and if a pilot goes like, oh no, there's turbulence, this can't be good, let's go up again, then you can see, then it may be, it's tricky to land, right? But if we apply this to like, again, like, but when the pilot goes like, there's turbulence, there's some weird stuff going on, but we'll just keep landing. That's normally what happens. Same thing with sleep. Like we can have this hypnic awareness jerks, we can see things that we can have some hallucinations even, and when we think of that as like, oh, this is that turbulence, then we don't react much to it, and sleep can happen anyway. So I just want to add that one.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Very cool. We have several questions, but yeah, let's do one more, and that will probably be it for today. Yama says, I didn't sleep the other night due to an asthma attack, and I felt not sleeping made me worse. I think I slept about 4 or 5 hours. It is better than no sleep. I fear not getting enough sleep. I hear. A little bit different question now. I would say that, of course, nothing here is medical advice, but when I hear this, I'm like, firstly, of course, anyone who has an asthma attack would, could be for like the pure kind of physiological reasons be, not sleeping, or because it's scary, of course, to have an asthma attack. So that could keep us awake. And then, the other aspect of this is like, could not sleeping like worsen our asthma? And of course, nothing here is medical advice. Everyone out there, talk to your doctors when you're concerned about your health. But I would say that what I always say is that there's no evidence that short sleep or insomnia causes any health problem. There's no evidence of that in literature, and knowing that can be really reassuring. Mm-hmm. So I just want to add that one.
Yeah.
Very well. Okay, let's conclude there. It's been super nice, Coach Alina. Talk to you today, and
yeah.
What are you gonna do the rest of the night?
I don't know. I'm gonna go to bed early. Actually, that's interesting thing, because before, for a very long time, because I was like following that, like originally the idea that stay longer, right? Don't spend too much time in bed. And now, as fear is no longer there, I realized that I can go to bed whenever I want. Like yes. Literally, like I can go like at 9, and it doesn't really matter. Sometimes I just fall asleep like instantly. Sometimes I just like whatever, think about something and sleep just happens. But I just want to say, like, many people like fear that, okay, once like they are recovered, like once they acquire that label of like someone who is recovered, which is like in itself is a trap, because it's like recovering is just like fading away of the problem and forgetting about that. What happens with other, like with things that we did for our sleep in terms of our habits, like at what time to go to bed, whether to take a nap or not, it stops being relevant, because now you become fully free to go whenever you want, because like that it has nothing to do with the actual nature of sleep. You cannot really manipulate your sleep in the way how you want it, so you become free. If it makes sense for you to go earlier or later, it doesn't matter. So I would say like these are like one of the kind of like joys of letting go of the fear. It's not really about like sleep anymore. It's more about just like, you do what feels nice. And yeah, so yeah, that's what I'm going to do soon.
Exercise freedom. Love it.
Go to rest. Okay.
All right. Well, super nice. Thanks everyone for being here, commenting, and we'll be back soon.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.